Today we're going to be talking about release planning, and if we get time we'll touch on a couple of other topics like communications planning. There's one more session and I'm going to take your suggestions on what should be in that. So if there's something we haven't covered so far that you would like to cover, send me an email. Other than that, by default I'd be probably talking about risks and a few other bits and pieces. There's a particular method of doing risks which I was planning to teach you. So today, when I do this session normally, there's a big simulation that happens. It takes a couple of hours after this where we all get actually hands-on with cards and in teams and do release planning, and it brings in dependencies and everything. So if you want to know how to do that for a workshop or something, I've got the materials and I can show you how, but it is not going to work in this room and this format. So I'm going to be talking at you again. My apologies for that. The thing that makes this really work, though, is your questions. So you can stop me at any time, and I would really appreciate any questions that you have. Alan, Taylor, and Dan, thank you very much for your help setting up this morning and last night. If you can keep an eye on the chat just in case there's any questions and put those forward, that'd be great. All right, release planning. So what does that even mean, release? What release? Let's just talk about that. Ancient. It's actually come from a long time ago that in a lot of settings maybe not that relevant now. But it's still a very useful process, but just this term. So if you can imagine the ancient days of old, this was the waterfall process. So BAs would sit in one building and come up with a bunch of requirements. Then they would produce a document that a whole bunch of people wouldn't read, and some really important people would sit in a room and basically weigh it and say, yes, that's good, you can go through that gate. And then the architects would do their giant design and then throw that over the wall to the developers, who would then throw the code, sometimes just in one giant chunk of value, across to the testers, who of course would find nothing wrong with it, and there would be a big bang at the end. And it got more expensive to change through that process, and the advice that we were given was plan, control, execute. So you must control everything, and you must plan heavy upfront planning. So in this world, this was the release at the end here, and so you were planning for that release and then subsequent releases. So there would be, perhaps that would be 1.0, and there would inevitably be a 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 2. So it gave you a way to look forward without using our agile process. But the language has still kind of stuck around from that. And just a quick word, if we were talking about project management hats, and if you think projects are dead or irrelevant, just think about the fact that we are now rolling out brand new HR software across all the footwork globally. That is going to be a big bang. Well, the first release of that anyway in August is going to be a big bang, because it kind of needs to be. You can't have half of your world of ThoughtWorks running on kind of one set of numbers and half running on the other. So again, nobody's calling that a project, I don't think, but that is definitely a project, and that would require really extensive release planning. So it was supposed to answer the question, when are we going to release and what will be in subsequent releases? Big upfront, hello Katie, big upfront estimation got a pretty bad name and rightfully deserved. And so this was sort of our response to how do we do longer range planning. So this was sort of the world here, and then this happened. Now, I don't know if anyone even knows what this is now. Carl, do you know what that is? Do people still use those? Yeah, all right, okay. Continuous integration and continuous delivery came along, and ThoughtWorks was a really big part of that. And in this world, we can, because we are, tell me if I'm wrong here, Carl, because we are constantly running automated tests on the code, we should be able to release smaller chunks of value with confidence, and we should be free from this giant release big bang nightmare. So why would we need release planning? Well, you want to release chunks of value in clumps that kind of make sense. If you think about the things that make sense to a user. So if you were rolling out, a new version of Netflix, for example, then it might make sense to roll out a set of profile changes together rather than just a whole series of uncoordinated events. So even in the most agile of worlds where we're doing continuous delivery, there's still a role for release planning, and we kind of use it as binoculars to create a fuzzy picture of the future. So this is actually a team at Lonely Planet many years ago. Hey, how you going? These guys were doing continuous delivery. Actually, Matt Kelsey was on this team. And they had the release bus. So these were completed cards. Notice they've got QR codes on them. Pretty cool. That would go into the Mingle instance to show you what it was. When they were done, this was the done pile, and people didn't want the bus to fill up too much. You wouldn't want to release, wait too long. That would start to create more and more risk. But they sort of figured out a rough metric of, I don't know, it's like 9 seats on the bus. And when the bus was filling up, they'd hit the button and release. They didn't release like every 5 seconds. So that was continuous delivery and just a rough sense of what's going to be in this release. This is just another interesting artifact from the past. This is lonelyplanet.com, the whole website, and all of the bits that hung off it, which went in lockstep releases every 2 weeks. And this was a bit of a visualization that just showed in this release which bits of the system are going to change. And it was put in the high traffic areas so that everyone could see it. So when you were walking past, you'd go, oh, release 62 is happening next Thursday. Actually, we did it earlier in the week than that. And here are the bits that are going to change. Oh, I didn't know shop was going to change. I might find out what that is because maybe that's going to affect me. So release planning is still very relevant. So as I said, we use it to create like a fuzzy long view. And it's we would certainly do some release planning at the beginning of a project in the discovery and inception phases. And it's sort of like a giant version of an IPM. So this is our short-range detailed planning, which is an iteration planning meeting, which would happen every iteration, whatever that's monthly, weekly, or fortnightly. And that sort of gives us steering as we go along and helps us to make prioritization decisions about what's going to happen in a fine-grained sense, and enables us to make that clear to everybody. Release planning is like a giant version of that. Yes, you would do it at the beginning, but you should try and make it really lightweight so that you can do it sort of as you go along. So the kind of situation where you might use release planning in modern times, the product owner wants to know, okay, I can see sort of the next 2 or 3 months, but when does it make sense to release this next feature? When could that happen, this whole brand new feature? So it's for sort of large chunks of scope, and we try to keep it as lightweight as we can so that we can do it repeatedly and provide these views for people. So the purpose, it's coarse-grained estimation. We use it at the beginning to get things started. It produces this fuzzy long-range plan. If you are in a project, whether people are calling it that or not, you will definitely need this process that I'm going to show you. I'm just going to show you one way to do it. There's many ways. But actually, like all planning, the real gold is the conversations that happen in the room, and it's your role to make sure that those bits of gold don't drop on the floor. So as we're talking about this release, Carl, with his technical knowledge, tells us about risks. He says, well, actually, when you go and try and play that epic, remember last time that just about killed us because we had to do X, Y, and Z. You hear the gold in there, right? That he's talking about a risk. Carl's just not calling it that. So you're going to make a note of that. And when you're thinking about that epic and when the team's thinking about that epic, you make sure that people remember those things. So just like an IPM, the conversations are real gold in release planning. After you do release planning, everyone will freak out. An estimate is not a promise, but this can be, in different organisations, this can be quite difficult to manage because in places that are really used to doing waterfall, or, as I said before, if there are marketing deadlines or the board has signed off on stuff, people start to get very, very excited about dates. So you need to remind people that this is just sort of a fuzzy picture, but in a way, there's not much you can do about this. Once you start transmitting date, rough date information out there, people will start to store it in their head quite naturally. Any questions? Okay, I'll stop picking on Carl. Oh, it's a question.
Yeah, sorry. Actually, even before we get started with this, I wanted to ask about, the recent movement around no estimates.
Yeah.
And obviously, a big input to release planning is estimates. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, what is your view or the people's view on this in this forum? Because
Okay.
some projects I have seen that people push back on it, but
Yeah.
there's a reason why we plan.
Right. Good. Because today the release planning method that I'm going to show you is the no estimates method, which was taught to me by Neil Craven, who came out with that whole line of reasoning. And when I met with him and was speaking with him, he said he got the hashtag wrong. So the hashtag was no estimates, and that went really viral. Went really viral. But the real point that he was trying to make was actually no points. And he did it on the basis that it's still a card counting method. He's quite happy to have people counting cards and even doing T-shirt sizing. He showed burn down charts and statistical looks at the project that he'd been on, which was a long-running project. And he proved that effectively you can't tell the difference between what had been happening on a points basis and what had been happening on purely if you've been counting cards. So he and I, this is the method that I went through with him. So that's the one we're going to teach today. Anyone who's telling you that you don't need to have a longer range view than just what's immediately in front of you, I would have a strong discussion with them, because I can't really see a world where that would be the case. Even in like really, really agile sort of product companies that I've worked in, like REA and others, they use long-range planning methods like this to map out, hey, where do we think we're roughly going to go in the next 3 months? We can change our minds. So, yeah, no estimates doesn't mean quite what people think it does, according to the person who invented it. So, yeah, an estimate is not a promise. Very hard to get that into people's heads, but the more that you let it become a promise, the less willing fantastic technical people are to sit in a room with you in good faith and give you their opinions and their rough ranges about how long things will take. So try to do it as you go along. It's a good quarterly process if you have a 90-day process running in your organisation. You would never, ever do this without having tech leads in the room. Like, I'm not a fan of having like 50 people in the room, and I have seen situations where thought workers have gone into an organisation and said, we can't do release planning, we can't really do discovery because we can't get 50 people in a room for 3 weeks. Well, of course you can't. Who can? So you have to make it small and lightweight enough. And I think the team needs to have buy-in, but I don't actually believe they have to be there for all of every single session. But you cannot start and go ahead without tech leads in this process, okay? Technical people give technical information. You are not a technical expert, except for some of us who are. If you come from a development background, you know the code base really well and you're going to be working on it, then you may well be in a position to give an estimate. But people on the delivery side standing around making up estimates is a really, really bad pattern, and it rightfully causes distrust.
Nick.
Yes.
Question. You have the whole team should feel involved, but they don't need to be there all the time.
Yeah.
What are some techniques or what are some examples of how you've managed to achieve?
Okay. I'd ideally like to have them there, but so what I would do is I would definitely have them there at the start so that everybody gets their head around the scope. Or here are all the epics. Here is the scope that we're talking about. And I would try to involve the team as much as I could. But if I think if people have more valuable things to do, because this process, I think you should be able to do it in well under a week. But people have been known to keep going at this for up to 2 weeks. I wouldn't want to take a whole team offline for 2 weeks. So I would definitely involve them at the beginning. You really need them there at the end. You can't just present a plan to the team that they haven't got buy-in to and say, here's what we're going to do. So somewhere between having the team there all the time and just having the smallest set of people possible. That's another good rule as a PM. Like when you think about, sometimes I think when people invite people to meetings, they don't really think about how much everyone's time they're soaking up, and they expect people to show up. I actually think about it the other way. I think, what is the minimum set of people that we could have in the room that we absolutely need to have there? Because I hate wasting people's time. So yeah, I guess that would be my answer. You definitely want them there at the beginning. You definitely want them there at the end. If you can, by all means, have them there all along. But like, don't come out of discovery without having, you know, if people could be setting up environments or doing work, setting up walls, getting the team area ready and stuff, you don't want to come out of discovery and then stop and do that. Or come out of release planning and stop and do that. So that's what would be my answer there. Yeah, we hate fixed plans. Every plan, you know, doesn't survive contact with the enemy, etc. But we value planning. We value it because of these conversations. We value it because of these kind of fuzzy views that it can give us of what the future could be like and that assist in planning. So I'm going to teach just one method here. This is just one way you can do this. I'm not saying it's the right way. And this is the way, that Neil and I spoke about, Neil Craven and I spoke about. So just generally, like, what's the recipe? What do you need? And quickly, maybe there's some people in this room who don't know what an epic is. So in Agile software development, we have stories. As Alan, I would like to blah so that I can blah. And when we're doing release planning, we just use epics, which are just giant versions of those. So instead of saying something like, as a user, I would like to put my birth date into a form. A whole epic might be something like sign-up process. It's very fuzzy, it's very coarse-grained. And here's an example of one, the kind of level. It'll be different for you, and you'll probably, as you go along, you might end up splitting some of your epics down. So this was one from the Lonely Planet website. So as a traveller, I want to view images and video related to an article so content can be brought to life. And that's actually huge. You can see over here what that turned out to be. That's bringing in a photo gallery, video, getting it into the right place, making sure there's explanatory text around it, making sure the video plays correctly. So that broke down into a whole bunch of smaller stories and took over a month to implement. So we're talking about like large chunks of value. So first ingredient is you want to have a bunch of epics ready in the room. So that's a little bit of preparatory work. That's conversations with your sponsor, product owner, whoever those people are. And that's particularly the BAs being across all of that and just writing a bunch of epics physically onto index cards. So this is again making that point, like, yes, ideally the whole team and all the key stakeholders, but don't go and block out, 2 weeks of 30 people's time if they're really senior and expect them to be able to do that in today's world, because I don't think that's very realistic. I personally think you should try to get this done in a week and you time box it. Like you could say, but what if it's a gigantic project? Well, you still time box it. 2-week release planning makes me cry. Have 2 work sessions, 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon, so you can keep the pace of the facilitation going. You time box it, and anything that you don't get into that release planning process, you pick up next time. You prioritise those epics. When you're facilitating, you facilitate for pace. People will want to go down rabbit holes endlessly. They'll want to drift off. Your job is to be the pacemaker, so you have to bring that energy to the room. You have to be an energetic person. Scope is fractal. Keep it at a high level. So if you are in an aeroplane and you're looking down at the coastline, you can see the kind of craggy outline of the coastline, right, at that level of detail. Then if you went down to, say, the level of like a cliff top or a house, and you look down on one of those details, you would see sort of more cragginess, right? Then when you climbed down and looked at those rocks, you would see even more tiny crenellations. And then as you went right down into the structure of the rock, you would see even more. And by this process, the coastline of Australia is actually infinite, because it really depends how deep you want to go. And scope is exactly like that. So that's why we keep getting pulled down into these rabbit holes, into smaller and smaller pieces of detail, because it's real. That sign-up form that I talked about before, we can talk about that at a high level, but as we zoom into it, you can get deeper and deeper and deeper. And I've literally seen stories on a project which there was a story for every single paragraph that happened on a page. right? And then when there was a punctuation change to that paragraph, people created a card for that, right? So I've seen that happen, and that was presented to a whole room. And I don't have a commentary on that, but I'm just saying, just think about it. Even at that level, you could probably go deeper. So scope is fractal. You need to stay at that level of the aeroplane flying over this scope. All right. You need lots of wall space. So this room here would be, we're in Borg in Melbourne, would be completely inappropriate for release planning, I'd say. You need a lot of physical space. Do you remember I showed you that picture of like a wall that had all of the stories and all of the cards going, all of those epics? You know, you could be dealing with a really large number of epics here. So you need lots of, it's physical, it's hands-on. Right, so first thing to figure out is, let's say you've got all of these giant epics, each one has a clear benefit. So you've got, I want to sign in, you've got to want to watch a video, you've got to want a photo gallery, I want to be able to search, very high level. And we can just put them all out on a table. And they don't have any estimates on them at this point. They don't have any points or anything like that. And we start to talk about each of the epics. And by the end of this process, we should have had a conversation about all of them. So we'll go through and we talk about each of the epics. And then we ask the tech leads, can you make a group of cards here that you think you could complete in whatever rhythm you want to talk about? Let's say it's months. Just make a group of these epics that you think you could complete in 1 month. We're not planning them in yet. It's really important. Long conversation ensues. Yes, but validation, single sign-on, the blah, 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 Elasticsearch, whatever. And that you end up with a group of cards that the top technical people in the room agree could be completed in 1 month. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards there. Okay, great. You just write down the number 5, and then you jiggle all the cards back around again. Remember, you've got heaps of them. And then we say, oh, by the way, when you're talking about each one, make sure that we touch on things like, what's the tech vision? So what's the really high-level technical solution for this? Make sure that that's in the conversation somewhere. Otherwise, people can't really be thinking about how many they could do in a month. Remember we talked about dependencies? Oh, yeah, you can do this one, but you'd have to do this one first. You note that down, note that down. And this is a really important one. You know, what happened last time we tried to do single sign-on? What happened last time we used this particular, I don't know, container technology, something technical? So you try and, remember the conversation's a goal, so you're making notes the whole time. And then you go, you mix them all up, and you make another set of cards. And you know, this time we have a conversation about them. You say, okay, now pick another set of cards that you think you could finish in 1 month. In this case, there's 4 of them. Keep going through this process, depending on how many cards you have, but keep going through till you've got, I don't know, 7 or 8 sets of cards, reasonable number of sets of cards that people think could be completed in a month.
Nick?
Yep.
What do you do when you haven't done something like this before at all? How do you start estimating on that?
If you don't, well, if you have senior technical people in the room, that's part of their job to be able to come up with a way of solving this problem in some sense, in a high-level sense, and they need to have a conversation about it. If it's completely like, I have no freaking idea, then just put it to the side.
So
yeah,
just a quick question. That implies then that there has to have been preparation for release planning, right? So you have to have an idea of what the technical architecture is going to be, the technical implementation, even at a high level. So would you set out some time, or would you how would you plan for all of your items to be ready for release planning? Because otherwise you're going to go to your first session and it'll be just a waste of time, right? Yeah.
So, it's much better if you've got the cards ready, if you've got time to do that, and they're in Mingle or they're in whatever you're using, then circulating those around to particularly technical people is a really good start, so that they can come prepared and they're not sort of put on the spot. Sometimes, particularly if there's a large number of cards, these conversations can take a while. And again, we just don't want to go too far down in the weeds. So it would be really good to send the list of epics around beforehand so that people can, if it's completely green fields, and this is something that nobody has done before, which is unusual, but in our line of work, but then yeah, definitely. Usually though, when we're in our kind of day jobs in this organisation, we're usually working on platforms that are better understood than that, mostly. But yep, absolutely. I'll probably put that in my recipe. Thank you, Leo. Good point.
And just following on with that, would it be equally valid to have a sort of 1 week sort of iteration zero sort of concept where people start delving into those before doing this?
Yep, but again, you don't want them to delve into deeply. Like most of this time, like it's producing a fuzzy picture. So part of the purpose of this is to figure out that many of these epics are not going to be played. So don't let it become a whole, we have to figure this all up front thing. And I think your good tech leads will guide you through that.
Hey, Nick, I have another question.
Yay.
Your image there implies that all of your epics, the stories that you have in front of you, or all of the cards that you have in front of you, are at an epic level. But reality is that you'll have a mix of stories and epics and features and all sorts of different sizes. So either this implies that you'd have to have done preparation to put them at a roughly similar level, or you just deal with it with them being at different levels.
I think for this no estimates method to work, they basically all have to be epics. So if you have a bunch of stories, you might want to bundle those into an epic for this, but you can't. This process doesn't work well when you have tiny sort of iteration level cards and epics. Because of this part here. So this part here is figuring out what would be a sensible velocity for this team, because without that we can't go ahead with this process. So yeah, we want to try and stay at epic level. So you do this.
Sorry to interrupt.
You're not interrupting, it's good.
Isn't part of the theory of no estimate though that some will be really small and really simple, but it'll be made up for in the ones with the complexity?
Sure. Yeah, but I don't think it makes sense to throw in like really tiny stories along with big epics in this process, because I think it's going to produce some funny results. But yeah, even within these epics, some of these will be massive and some of them will end up to be small. Absolutely. So yeah, keep going, making these groups of cards and just notice how many are in the circle each time. So go through 7 or 8 times and you might get, 4, 5, 7, 3, 2. Take that number and take an average of that number once you're sort of comfortable with it. And then that becomes the number that you use to try and figure out, you keep repeating this process to try and figure out how many of these no estimates epics this team could get through in, let's say, a month. So now you've got your velocity that you can use at least for a baseline plan. So create a number of time boxes you want to plan for. So if we're talking about months, this would be an 8-month view. If we're talking about, remember this is release planning, it's very high level. This is to get a rough kind of start on it. You probably would put dates in there. And then let's say the number had become 3. You can start then, again, these cards have no estimates on them. And you're right, Amanda, they will average out over time is the way that Neil thinks about it and our experience. So yes, you'll have small ones in here and big ones, but over time they'll average out. So you put kind of 3, whatever the number of epics was in each of these columns. This looks like I've done 14 days here. And now we can have a conversation, start to have the conversation about when certain things could happen. So we're going to start arranging these, particularly with the product owner, in an order which makes sense for releasing the product. But this part here is not anything like a release plan yet. No, this is not even a plan. This is nothing. But you're at a point now where you have a bunch of epics on a wall and there's a reasonable hypothesis to say, yeah, these could be, you could get through these roughly in that period of time. So now you've got to adjust for a whole bunch of things to make this realistic. So iteration length, maybe your planning conversations have been around months, but you have iterations of 2 weeks. You might want to take that into account. This one here, like Christmas is not a surprise. Easter is not a surprise. Labor Day is not a surprise. So you should be at least putting Post-it notes into those time boxes that start to indicate some of those things that are going to impact on your team. If you know people are coming and going in the team, again, I would just put those on that board where they're going to happen with post-it notes at this stage. You need to think about at least 10% overall for sickness and unexpected leave. Maybe there's even ThoughtWorks events. That first iteration there, like I said, this is only a starting point. You'd be crazy to actually expect that you could execute 3 epics in that first one. There's going to be a ramp up. So this one might become a 2. You might take an epic out of there. 3, you start to get, remember, it's very coarse grained, very rough. So you kind of end up with something like this, where you're starting to, remember, it's very coarse grained, so you don't need to get down into the weeds of the detail of it. But I've got a ramp up here. I know there's like a week off here for Easter. You start to build a plan that's a little bit more believable.
I just noticed a comment from Jacksha. Just want to voice that one. It's actually a few minutes old, so apologies to Jacksha. One of the projects for cards which we were not able to estimate or gauge, it was talking about the size of the cards, I think. We had to split the unknowns as small cards, proposing that.
Yep.
So that then brings a question, how would they fit into this?
Well, I don't know, would you have, wow, that took a long time to change. To me, like a spike is usually a small time box piece of work that the outcome of it is not value, but it's information and actually a decision. So if you know that you have an epic here, you probably have a story to spike it here. If the spike is a whole new technology or a whole new unsolved problem, then a spike could be of epic size, but normally that's more an iteration planning level. We are not at that level now. We are right up in the aeroplane, looking down.
Does that make sense for Jacksha?
Okay. All right, so we're getting a rough, did someone have something to say? No, we did. Okay. So we end up with a rough sort of plan here. Usually these numbers are a bit higher than that. So we start to get a view of things that just clearly will not fit into this plan. So this is going to help us to start setting expectations about what can and can't be done in a period of time. So things are going to start not fitting, and that is going to force conversations with people who have product knowledge about what you're trying to build, about what's really important. And so sequence and priority are not the same thing, but if this one here is really important, then you're going to need to start forcing the conversation to pull some of these out to keep it realistic and put it in there. And when I was talking before about like things that you want to take into account, there's just contingency as well. So the fact that some people in a room thought that they could get through this set of cards in a month and this and this and this and this, we need to be skeptical about that because we know that shit happens. So we might just take a whole epic out on the basis of that. You need to be, this is just to sort of say there's actually a burn-up now, but, you have this kind of pessimistic velocity. You might like it to be X, but you know that things are going to go slightly slower than people think. So you need to build that pessimism into your plan. When you're making that release plan, like I said before, the goal is to try and put things together that make sense together. This is in the product management realm. So you have someone like Katie Marker there who is making sure that the sequence of these things is going to make sense to your end users so that you're not building something they can't use before something that they can. I keep saying this and I'm going to say it again. So you have to keep your eye on the bigger goal, okay? Your goal is not to just execute this project with your team and win. Remember, we talked about dependencies, we talked about like external dates. Your goal is to be part of usually a larger program of work that's trying to get a larger outcome for an organization. So you have to understand all the work around that release. You need to know when, for example, if there's advertising booked in, you would want to put that on your release plan because people are going to need to know what you're going to be advertising, what you're going to be promoting. If there's training and go-to-market activities, you need to think about those. So the fact that you can release a feature is very different to people being able to use it. So I was talking to someone in retail a few years ago, and was talking about an agile approach and continuous integration and all that sort of stuff. And, wouldn't it be great if your retail software could change, just be super responsive? And they said, no, that's a complete nightmare. That's horrible. We've got 20,000 people working checkouts all around the country. And to bring a feature to them that they didn't understand how to use would bring our business to a stop. So, and it's also true if anyone in this room's ever worked at REA, that's something they really have been trying to focus on to get it right, which is this go-to-market, which is to say that if you've got real estate agents, again, you don't want to just deploy features to them that they don't yet understand. So that can affect the timing of what you do when in your release plan as well. Ops handover, so you need to think about that. And in your prioritization, you probably are familiar with this idea of cost of delay. We have methods to sort of quantify that. I can talk about that another time if you like. Does anyone here not know about cost of delay? I think everyone does, so that's good. So, but what it basically says is if you have, it basically says there's no point making Easter eggs in September, right? If you are making Easter eggs, then you really need to get them out by Easter, and there is a significant cost to not doing that. Right? So cost of delay is something to think about when you're doing release planning, this long-range planning, because there are certain things that because of hitting a regulatory deadline or something like that have a very real cost to an organisation. Sometimes product owners will talk to you about, but there's a great cost of delay because it's a fantastic feature, and every day that we don't get it out there, sorry, that doesn't count. Cost of delay is like, what is the real cost? Why can't I do this work in a month for real? Why can't I do it three months later for real? What is the real cost of delaying that and doing this instead? And this is a conversation that's often missing.
Hey Nick, what about the inverse? So we've seen in our project the opposite, where things are delayed and pushed back because we don't need them, but then that's because they've been delayed, then that brings in cost. Does it make sense?
So can you give an example?
So for example, we built a feature and we didn't release it because we didn't need it right now.
Yeah.
And that implied a cost that when we did release it, we'd have to do again all of the testing, and because things have moved because it's software, then it created work, so that cost.
It kind of goes stale. Yeah, that's probably a good thing to think about as well. Like you're always, like we're agile, so we're always trying to deploy the things, get the things out there to customers that make the most sense at that time.
But that's what I mean. But that's what I mean. Is there any techniques or any? How would you recommend on visualizing this? Because we don't want to put it out because it doesn't make sense for the users right now. So, for example, Easter eggs, they don't make sense in September, even though we're pretty much ready. So
they're going to be stale.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, Eric.
Let me ask a question. So then, doesn't that take a step back and become an issue the way you're prioritizing? Because why did you build something that wasn't needed at the time you built it? Yeah. That probably means there is a problem with your process upstream.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to build Easter eggs, let's say Easter eggs take 1 month to build. Yeah. Why are you starting to build Easter eggs in August? Yeah. For the following Easter. Yeah. Build something else that will be needed maybe for Christmas so that then you can start with the Easter eggs. Yeah. January or whatever. Yeah.
I probably have some, like what you said. Yeah. I'm with Eric. It sounds like the product planning process maybe isn't the best it could be. And I actually do have some ideas about this that I could talk about with you offline, but I think, it's about quantifying. It's exactly what you're saying. It's about, okay, well, we have released this thing, but the feature's not toggled on. How can we quantify the cost of not doing it now? And
I think these you should draw that back to the benefits that were advised of in the business plan of when the realization is going to happen. So if you can't realize that benefit now, then it's going to cost, then you can figure out what the actual cost of it is.
Yeah, there's that. And then the activity as well. So you could go back to the fiction department of business cases and pull one of those fictional stories off the shelf. When we were at Telstra, when we added up all the benefits, it actually created negative truck rolls. So, but yeah, you can totally do that. That's it. And
there's also the larger risk, and I think this has happened as well, where you develop something which was required at the time, and then the world changes, and then they never use it, and then it's just seen and perceived as a waste of money. Yeah,
and it is. Yeah, and that is a failure of sequencing. I'm just going to keep moving because I imagine we've all got 9 o'clock meetings, so I don't want to go right up to 9 o'clock. But I love these questions. Please keep them coming because they just make it so much better for everyone. Okay, so you get your first release plan out there. There's no great signal that'll tell everyone in the room, like, yeah, this is good. You're going to have to just keep checking with the room. And yeah, it's wrong. You've just done all this work. It's definitely wrong. It's not going to turn out that way. It never does. But at least it's defensible and realistic. So you need to be able to have answers when people say to you, well, why? Because they will as soon as you put this out there. As I said, people will freak out. Why can't we have this until April the 23rd? That's ridiculous. It's just a sign-in, blah, blah, blah. You need to be able to have an answer for that, and you need to be able to defend your team against that kind of interference. If everyone, including the client, has bought into this plan, we all need to get behind it, and it's really important that it's defensible, so you need to have an answer to that. Yes, it's going to change. Yes, it's super high level, and that's okay. It's just a starting point. It's not a fixed plan. You don't fail if you don't follow it. When we were grouping those cards, we were doing a kind of estimation. Again, Neil says no points, actually, not no estimation. And no point, hashtag no point, that would have been a much better hashtag. But this is information you can now share with other teams, with caveats. So, this could all change. And now that you've got that picture, remember, Team B is depending on you for that air pick. And so you can now say to them, well, it looks like that's going to be, the first half of September. That is super valuable information, even if it is going to change. You can't really, in a world where you're working and you have dependencies on other teams, you can't really live without this process in some form, because you don't just live in your own world of getting your own project done. And when you're sharing them, you're always going to have caveats. So yeah, that's my piece on release planning. And so now we have 15 minutes to go. Do you want me to go on to my next topic, or for maybe 10 minutes and finish at 5:02? Or would you like to have the gift of time because maybe you're running from a tram to your gig? Or anyone?
I'm happy to keep going.
Yeah. All right, we'll go a little bit further. Oh, my simulation, I wish we could do it. It's so good. It's got dependencies and everything. It's really good. Damn. Okay. Stakeholders. This word is pronounced snakeholder. Stakeholder management. Letting people know what's going on, really. So when all projects have people who are paying for them, they have people who are very interested in the outcomes. People, in some cases, their careers depend on this thing happening. So we avoid surprises, even good ones. So even if you, let's say that you somehow got incredibly ahead of time, or you managed to make a feature even more awesome than you thought it was going to be, I would advise you not to just sort of announce that at your next showcase to everyone, including your sponsor and your product owner, in such a way that it's a surprise to them. You should give that information to them and let them have that win. Yeah. So we don't want surprises, even good ones. And I talked before. We had a whole session on, oh my God, we're not going to make it. Things are running a bit slow. We did a whole hour on how to handle that. So, and that was a big theme that came through there too, which was we don't surprise people with this information. So yeah, make your key stakeholders look and feel good. If it's good, it's theirs. If it goes wrong, it's yours. It's not Teams, it's yours. You say, wow, I really screwed that up. Right? That's part of your job. The magic of the meeting before the meeting, secret magical tip. So yeah, if you have a large a showcase or some important meeting that's coming up, particularly if you've got sort of tricky stakeholders around. And, let's face it, often what we're doing in an organisation, it does have its detractors. We've all seen that. So you do not just go into that meeting, and hope that things turn out, or even go into that meeting with really well-planned comms. You have a meeting before the meeting with your sponsor. You buy them a coffee or a piece of cake or a sandwich or something, and you guys had a little chat about that meeting. And so kind of questions you might ask is, what do you think might come up? Do you see any risks in this meeting? Who are the people in the room? Who are the real decision makers? Because, often in corporate Australia, when it comes time for a showcase, like suddenly the room will fill up with 50 people who have never shown up to a stand-up, didn't come to planning. They kind of come in like seagulls on like an old chip, and they show up and they make a lot of noise, and then they fly off again. So you're only, we could probably do a whole session on that, but one of your key ways to combat that is to keep your sponsor on side and your business contact, whoever that is, and have the meeting before the meeting so that you are on exactly the same page as them, and the team can be as well. And those things you should reduce the number of unpleasant surprises you have in rooms like that. And I don't know if I said this before, but the dishes effect. So if you are having one of these kind of conversations with a stakeholder, rather than sitting opposite them and saying what you need to say, it's much better if you're both standing side by side and looking at a burn up or something like that. It just works a whole lot better. I call it the dishes effect because this is when I have teenage children, and if I'm going to ask them what did you do last night, I would much rather do it when we're both doing the dishes and we're side by side or we're driving down a road than actually facing them one on one. Food really helps. It's an old thing, but the meeting before the meeting, there's a lot of magic in that. If you have detractors, and you will, you need to understand their point of view and understand their motives and think about what they have to lose, particularly what they have to lose in this situation. So if you've been in this situation before, I notice we're 10 minutes to go, so I'll wrap up on this slide. You'll know that, sometimes we have flare-ups in meetings, we have detractors who kind of fly in and try to sort of throw mud at what we're trying to do. The best thing you can do is to work through your sponsor or directly with that person and understand what is scaring them about the situation. What do they have to lose in the situation? I wouldn't ask them that question directly. Because when people are being aggressive, it's generally coming from a fight or flight place. So these people it's not because they want to drive over the top of you, it's because they feel they have probably something to lose in this situation. So if you understand that, you're going to be in a much better situation to sort of be able to move ahead with your project. I don't agree with the views in the Herald Sun, but I read the Herald Sun whenever I can, because I want to understand how those views, contrary to mine, are constructed and how those people are thinking. So that's a useful thing to do. Otherwise, you're just going to be blasting them with your version of why this is great and they should basically go away. That doesn't work. Crucial conversations. If you haven't done that course and you've got some training budget, just do it. It's brilliant. Don't get the book, do the course. I would love to spend all my time teaching that course. That would be I'd love that. That would be my favourite job. It's so good. Quick idea with your stakeholders, something to think about, something that my first boss told me on my first day at work. He said, okay, you've just opened a bank account with me. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, well, every time that you say something is going to happen and it happens, you get $1 in your bank account. Every time you say something is going to happen and it doesn't happen, you lose $1 in your bank account. Your job is to put money in your bank account and stay positive. So when you're thinking about stakeholders and building trust, it doesn't matter how small the things are, but we build trust by keeping small agreements. And so think about that with your stakeholders. Build trust by the keeping of small agreements. So if you don't have trust, you can begin with even the smallest possible thing being true about some piece of delivery on your project or absolutely anything at all. You start building trust by keeping your word on small agreements. All right, I'm going to stop there because I don't want anyone to be racing around. Thank you very much for coming along and listening to me again, and thanks for all the questions. I wish you could be in the room and we could be doing that simulation and stuff. But this way we can share this course with a whole lot of other people thanks to the work of Alan and Dan. So thank you all very much. Have a fantastic day. Bye.
Bye.